Hey there, this is your orchestration tutor Thomas Goss with a new segment, The Orchestrator at Work. Actually, I'm in the middle of a massive project right now, and I've barely enough time to do anything. But it's actually a good time for me to be doing this segment because it's all fresh in my mind, the way the process works and how I can explain it to you. In addition, I've just put together a new studio, as you can see behind me, which has all of my equipment sort of boiled down into its most efficient type of workspace. I'll go into detail about my setup a little bit later in this segment, but first, let's talk about the project. First of all, I should explain the importance of a contract, to me anyways, as a working orchestrator. I don't do any orchestration anymore unless I've got a contract, and I don't sign a contract unless I've got ample time to take care of the commission. In the case of this project, I made a proposal to the general manager of the orchestra, and we looked it over together and made some adjustments to it. Then a few weeks later, we signed a contract together, and it's confidential, but I can share the following with you. First of all, the contract was for 50% in advance, 50% upon completion. That's a pretty standard type of contract nowadays for an orchestrator or arranger. The commission was worked out in pretty good detail. Most important points, I would say, the instrumentation of the orchestra, how many minutes of music, and so on. It would really be a shame if I had orchestrated this piece with instruments that the orchestra couldn't afford to hire, or made it much too long and then had to throw away 4 or 5 minutes of beautiful orchestration. Part of the mechanics of the contract includes my end of the bargain, which is handing in a completed score, giving the orchestra some PDF files which contain all the parts, and creating a script for this program. Now let's talk about the commission itself. This is my third in an ongoing series of orchestral education programs. Basically what it is a 1-hour extravaganza for orchestra, which is targeted at kids, say, age 2 to 6. So there's lots of classics that are, very catchy, there's kids songs, and there's some big band jazz numbers to show off the singing talents of our presenter. Some of the special challenges of scoring an extended work like this and having that type of audience is that you have to program works which capture and hold the attention of the audience, and they can't be all that long. You can't really throw a 12-minute concerto at a little kid unless they're a very exceptional young person. Another challenge is that the music has to be audible all the way through. And that is actually very challenging because most orchestral music has really widely varying dynamics, down from pianissimo all the way up to fortissimo and louder. If you have a typical audience of these kids, they'll be mumbling, muttering, talking to their friends or their parents. They'll be making noise, and maybe about 50 to 80% of the time, if you're lucky, paying attention to what's going on stage. So that noise level is something that you have to deal with. In order to overcome that, my job as an orchestrator is to make the orchestra as full as possible all the time. So that involves a lot of tutti writing, a lot of writing for full orchestra most of the time. And if I'm using an existing classical work, I often have to go through it and make adjustments so, once again, the orchestra is very, very full, and parts in the score which may drop down dynamically will still be heard. Now let me take a couple of minutes to explain my setup, which is actually pretty simple. Nothing I have costs all that much or is all that difficult to run. Basically, I've got the program Sibelius running on a 2009 MacBook, and I use an M-Audio 88 key controller keyboard to input data. Then I've got the audio routed to computer monitor speakers, and I also have a little loop for internal audio processing. I use Audacity for transposing pieces into different keys, or to slow it down to get a better idea of what the piece is like if I have to transcribe it by ear. Then I've got my Samsung vertical screen, in which I can see my full score all the way from top to bottom. Very, very useful. And a 250 gigabyte hard drive for storing my projects once I'm done. Last, which is actually a fairly important piece of equipment, is my printer that can scan, copy, and print US legal size paper. That's my preferred size for making scores. I find that with using A3 paper, the conductor tends to fold the score in half in order to fit it into his briefcase. Whereas US legal size is just about big enough for any type of project unless you've got a truly massive orchestral score. Now let's talk about the actual work of scoring. Generally, in a variety program like this, sourcing is very important. I use all sorts of sources for my pieces. Since this is a kids' concert, I might check out some CDs from the library or download some clips from YouTube, or just use my own memory of what the piece is like. I also go on the internet and I check out different versions of lyrics and write my own lyrics if it seems to fit the parameters. Another important source is the original score of a classical work that's going to be introduced into the program. And of course there's sheet music, which I use from time to time, but I'm finding more and more that I just tend to use my own ear and listen to things off of the internet rather than using sheets. I also consult with the presenter who is going to be singing some of these songs to figure out which key suits her voice best for each song. Also, what would be a good key for a sing-along where children's voices are involved. My overall guide is the script, which has got pretty much every word that's going to be spoken or sung in the concert. So going through that, I follow the lyrics pretty exactly, and I also make any adjustments to the songs which can include a little bit of dialogue between the conductor and the presenter, say, or maybe some words that the presenter might say to the kids to get them to join in on the song, say, moving to the music or singing along. Once I really get going, I tend to score everything in one long score, all of the different segments all together in one file. This makes it very easy to extract parts and to put them into booklet form for the librarian. One of my favorite pieces so far in working on this project has been working on the piece Choo Choo Chiboogie. This is an old piece by Louis Jordan, who was really kind of like the grandfather of rock and roll. And since the theme of our kids program this year is about trains and transport, it's the perfect song. So some of the challenges in scoring a piece like this are transcribing the very, very simple swing arrangement, say, 7-piece band, and turning that into a full orchestra piece. You have to make sure that you don't wear anybody out. A typical strategy in transcribing swing for orchestra is to make the brass, typically the horns, do the offbeats, which I've done here, but I still give them a little bit of a break later on in the piece. I've also included muted trombones and trumpets, and had one of the clarinets play saxophone to give it a more authentic swing sound. One of the fun things was to be able to add some very, very train-like tooting in the upper wind during the chorus. That was a lot of fun. And also making the intro and the outro very big and train-like. Okay, so probably in about 10 days, maybe 2 weeks, the script and the score are going to be finished. At that point, I'll pass along a draft of the complete program to the conductor, the presenter, and to the orchestra manager for approval. They'll probably give me a few thoughts. They might have a few changes that they want to make. When I get those suggestions back, I'll make any final adjustments that are necessary, and then I'll extract and proofread the parts. An important thing is that I don't go to the expense of printing and binding the final score until I've proofread the parts, because actually in proofreading the parts, you can see a few, usually stupid little errors that you've made that need to be fixed, and of course, the parts have got to agree with the final score, right? It's fairly expensive to print out a final score, especially if you're using heavyweight paper, which you really do need to use in a professional score like this. Then the orchestra pretty much takes over. I might meet with the presenter and the conductor for a run-through, and then attend the rehearsals and the performance. And of course, I receive the balance of the money owed me in the contract. A pretty important detail.